It all sounds so simple, doesn't it? Take one device, split the beam of light coming out of your telescope into two, put two eyepieces in here, and you can use two eyes instead of one. Why doesn't everybody do this? Well, as it turns out, it's not quite that simple. Now, if you haven't seen my beginner's video on Binoviewers, you might want to look at that first before looking at this one. Now, I'm not going to repeat everything in that video, but there are some considerations to using Binoviewers, some of which you've thought of, and some of which you probably haven't thought of. Well, there's the issue of the price. These things are not cheap. You have to buy the Binoviewer. This one costs $1,100 US. You have to double up on your eyepieces. If you use expensive eyepieces, then that cost goes up as well. If you have a telescope that's 6 inches, for example, you don't get 6 inches worth of light in each eye. It only gathers 6 inches worth of light, and what you see through each eye is considerably smaller. It adds a lot of weight to your rig, and you may have to go up to the next size mount, or you may have to add counterweights. Now, something you might not have thought of is that not everybody's ability to merge images are the same. Some people can merge images up to very high powers, some people start to peter out. For me, I'm good to about 125 power, at which point I stop losing the ability to merge the images. And perhaps the most important thing of all, this thing consumes a lot of light travel. The light's going to come in here through the telescope and it's going to come out here and it gets bounced around. So you're consuming, I don't know, 5 or 6 inches worth of light travel here, and you may not come to focus in most telescopes without the use of a dedicated Barlow or Barlow-like device down here. A lot of things for you to consider before you actually take the plunge and do this. So Russ over at Denkmeier saw this and he said, oh, let me send you my new Binotron 27 and we're going to review this today, and I'm going to go through all of this. It's not just a Binoviewer. If you're not familiar with this product, it's got a couple of interesting tricks up its sleeve that you didn't see coming. So let's go through all of this, and I'm going to try to help you determine if this device is right for you. So it looks as though Russ sent me, almost everything. Looks like he sent me almost all the catalog. But this is the Binoviewer itself, and let's go ahead and take that out and talk about what's here. So the Binoviewer itself is relatively conventional at first glance. You have your normal adjustments. This is your interpupillary adjustment. Your diopter adjustment, I am not going to touch that because that has been set for my eyes, but in the case, this is something a little bit extra. This is a collimation tool. Yes, you can collimate this Binoviewer. Now, one of the main problems that I see is when somebody's Binoviewer goes out of collimation, most likely as the result of getting dropped. In my experience, most people don't bother to get that fixed. And that's a real shame. I know it's a problem. You have to find somebody who's good at working on this sort of thing, and those people generally do not work cheap. But I think it's a shame we've got people with $1,000 Binoviewers just sitting around in drawers not doing much of anything. This is a game changer. Russ's instructions show that this is a relatively easy process. Having said that, I did not touch this. I would prefer not to mess with the collimation because this came very well collimated out of the factory. If you use filters when you observe, this is a filter switch assembly, and normally this would sit in here. I don't use filters when I observe, so I took this out. But you can thread in here or drop in a 2-inch filter here, and you can slide it in like this. If all you have are 1¼ inch filters, that is the 1¼ inch adapter for your filter switch. Now, even with the filter switch out, you have a device here that looks like another filter switch, but this isn't. This is actually a power switch. That's right, you can change the magnification of the Binoviewer by flipping these levers in and out. And here's how this works. With the lever in this position, the magnification is 1.3x. Pull it out, it becomes 2.3x. Push this one in and it becomes 3x. Now, you don't have to remember those numbers, but you are going to be flipping back and forth like this quite a bit. A couple of quick observations about this. Number one, as you increase the magnification from, say, 1.3 to 2.3 to 3.0. As you do that, your telescope is going to progressively require more out-focus travel. Now, on every refractor that I tried this on, there wasn't enough focus travel in the stock focuser to accommodate all three magnifications. Therefore, on a refractor, you may need an extension tube. Second observation is I used this low power 1.3x almost all the time. That's me. You may be different. All right, so the Binoviewer actually comes in three parts here. There's this traditional part that you're probably used to seeing. There is this extension tube that threads on and off. You can see this. And there is this module here, which also threads on and off. This contains the optical element. All right, so let's go through all three types of telescopes. This is a universal Binoviewer. You can use it on a reflector, a refractor, or a Schmidt-Cassegrain. So let's go through this. Let's take the reflector first. The reflector is easy, okay? You just leave all this stuff together. That is the Binoviewer, the extension tube, and the amplifier at the end. Just put this right into the reflector and you're good to go. Now let's talk about the Schmidt-Cassegrain. The Schmidt-Cassegrain is also easy. With a reflector, you use everything: the Binoviewer, the extension tube, and the OCS lens module. With a Schmidt-Cassegrain, it's also relatively easy. You don't use any of it. You just use the Binoviewer itself, and you unthread this extension tube. Now you'll notice there's quite a lot of thread travel in here, and there's two reasons for this. Number one is for mechanical stability, and number two, for a reflector, sometimes you're going to have to thread all of this out and then use this as a locking ring to make sure that it's locked into the position that you want it to be in. But for a Schmidt-Cassegrain, you just take all of this out. See, this has got the lens in it, this comes out, take all of this out. You just take this and you put it inside your Schmidt-Cassegrain, and you're good to go. Okay, let's say you're going to use this on a refractor. With a refractor, things get just a tiny bit more complicated, but it's not too bad. With a refractor, it is assumed that you're going to be using a diagonal. I've got a diagonal here. And what you're supposed to do with a refractor is you unthread the OCS lens module, set the extension tube aside, and the lens element threads into the telescope side of the diagonal, and then the Binoviewer goes in like this, and then it goes into the telescope like that. All right, so there's a couple of quirks that I do want to point out with each of the three designs, and I'll run through these really quickly. You'll see I have it in reflector mode. That is, you have the body of the Binoviewer, the extension tube, and the OCS lens module. In reflector mode, you're probably going to be weighting down the front of the telescope enough that you have to put weight on the back of the telescope. Now, I use this a lot on a StarMaster Oak Classic, which you can move the tube up and down inside the cradle. It's a little bit less of an issue. But if you've got a conventional 8-inch Dobsonian, you're going to have to figure out a way to put weight on the back of the telescope. The other thing, as I described before, sometimes you might have to make some adjustments here so that you have access to all three magnifications, because there's quite a bit of distance between focus travel between 1.3x and 3x. In fact, in many reflectors that I use this on, I found I had to thread this thing almost all the way and then lock it down with this locking ring here. Now, when you do have this unthreaded a lot, you will notice that this will protrude into the light path when the focuser is racked all the way in. It's just something that you have to live with. Okay, let's talk about Schmidt-Cassegrain mode. As you can see, I have it in SCT mode. There is just the Binoviewer itself and the little stubby nose piece here that you put into the telescope. So the first quirk here is that when you put it in Schmidt-Cassegrain mode, these magnifications are no longer 1.3, 2.3, and 3.0. And the reason for this is you no longer have the lens in the place amplifying the signal. So in this mode, which would normally be 1.3x, it becomes 0.66 power. That's right, it's actually less than 1.0. And for this reason, I wound up using this in Schmid grains a lot because I liked seeing the wide field. This is not something you're used to seeing in a Binoviewer, and I used it a lot in the C5 and the C6. I thought this was a lot of fun. Another quirk here. Can I put this into a Maxitov? Yes, you can. I tried it on a number of Macs and it worked just fine. But there's another interesting thing here. If you thread off this piece, which would normally be on in almost every application you have, you'll see this actually is an 1¼ inch device. They've just put a 2-inch nose piece on there, I think largely for mechanical stability. And by the way, you can see the power switches here about how they move the lenses in and out. But in 1¼ inch mode, this is interesting. I'm going to go to the case and get this. You can, if you want to, thread on a 1¼ inch nose piece. Now, when you do this, you could put this in something like a Celestron C90, an ETX, or one of my favorite telescopes to use this on was the SkyMax 102 that you saw me review earlier. I'm not going to do this because it's going to tip the back of this over, but this is a lot of fun. Again, in this power switch, it's actually in 0.66 mode, so the magnification is actually less than what's specified on the eyepiece. It's an unusual choice, but I found myself using it here a lot. If you got a Quest Star, you can do the same thing. Go for it. Okay, so in refractor mode, again, you remove the relay lens here, put it into the telescope side of the diagonal, and it goes on like this. Now, as I alluded to earlier, the main quirk of the refractor is finding enough focus travel. The telescope I used that had the closest ability to find focus in all 3 modes was my astrophysics stowaway. The Feather Touch focuser on that does have quite a bit of focus travel on it, but I found that I could reach focus with 1.3x, with 2.3x, but I had to add a small extension tube to reach 3x, and you have to find the right length of extension tube so that you can again come in to 1.3x. Refractors work really, really well with this, I found. Now there's other stuff in the case too. I'm not going to go through all of that. There's a lot here, but I do want to point out that Russ has a 14mm planetary eyepieces that he matches specifically for this Binoviewer. You got all that? Yeah, I didn't either, at least not at first. It'll come to you, I promise. It gets a little bit more intuitive. So one thing that sets this Binoviewer apart from others that you may have seen is you can get a set of 3D eyepieces for it. Yes, you heard that right, 3D eyepieces. So I've got them here. These are $5.99 for the pair, and it actually makes the object in the eyepiece appear as if it's in 3D. Now, if you look at the eyepiece, there is a matrix of little prepared squares underneath affixed to the lens of the eyepiece. Now, there are 2 markings on the eyepiece, one for N, which is near, and F, which is far. If you put the N, which has a rubber nib on it so you can find it in the dark, in the 6 o'clock position, whatever you're looking at, let's say it's a globular cluster, will appear in front of the background stars. If you then turn the eyepiece 180 degrees to the F, which is now in the 6 o'clock position, it will put the object, say it's a globular cluster again, behind the stars. Fascinating, isn't it? But it gets even more interesting. If you look at them, only one of the eyepieces has the prepared optical array underneath it. The second one is normal. It's just a regular eyepiece. So he's determined that you only need one prepared eyepiece for you to see the 3D effect. Now, because it is sort of just playing tricks with your eye-brain system, everybody that we showed this to had a slightly different response to what they saw. It was kind of interesting to poll people, what did you see? Well, here's what I saw. We all agreed that the 3D effect is mild. It's not like one of those bad 3D movies where they're looking for excuses to stick poles out at the audience. No, I think if it did that, it would get annoying pretty fast. Rather, the 3D effect, again, is subtle. And we found that the less experienced the observer was, the harder it was for them to see the 3D effect at first. One club member who's really into Binoviewers showed this to his wife, and she said she couldn't see any 3D effect at all. But after a little bit and being taught what to see, you could see, yeah, the globular cluster, it's not two-dimensional. You kind of almost want to look around it. Okay, so at this point, we had a lot of questions from the club members about this thing, and I imagine you probably do too. Question number 1, can you look at the moon? Well, the instructions say it's not ideal for looking at the moon because it's bright enough that you can start to see the edges of the panels and the moon because it's just so bright. Now, is this true? Yes, it is true. That didn't stop me from doing it anyway. I looked at the moon through a lot of telescopes, and yeah, I could see the edges of the panels, but you know what? I didn't care. This is kind of fun. Second question that comes up. Can you use this in the daytime? Let's say you want to isolate a bird on a tree and against the background. Well, again, when things are bright enough, you can see the edges of the panels, and it says it's not recommended. You're also going to have some image erecting issues there too. But again, I didn't care. I did it anyway because, again, it's fun. Just sort of had some fun looking through some stuff in the daytime with it. Another question we get. Okay, so it says N for near and F for far. Could you, in fact, sit here with the N at first and then slowly turn the eyepiece 180 degrees and then make the object, let's say it's a globular cluster, go from in front of the stars to behind the stars? Well, the instructions say that the panels are optimized for either the 0 position or the 180 position, and if you're in between, your telescope may appear to be out of collimation. And again, you know me, I did it anyway, just because it's fun. And yeah, I can kind of see what he's talking about, but yeah, you can almost imagine that you're making the object, the globular cluster or the nebula, whatever, go back and forth. It's kind of fun to try out. Try it yourself, see what you think. Another question that comes up. Let's say I have another Binoviewer, but I want to experience the 3D effect. Can I just buy the eyepieces separately, and will it work? The answer is yes, you can do this. So these eyepieces cost $599 for the pair, and you can put them in any Binoviewer of your choice. We tried these in a number of them, including mainly the TeleVue unit, but we also tried them in older Denkmeier units, and yeah, it works fine. Another question, can I look at the moon without using the prepared eyepiece? Let's say I just want to use, I like these eyepieces, say, and I just want to use them normally and don't want to see the 3D effect. Yes, you can do that. For an extra $149, Russ will sell you another one of these. Keep in mind, one of the eyepieces is normal. It's not prepared in any way. So if you just get another one, you'll get a matched pair. You can use it just like a normal pair of eyepieces. So I actually have that here. It's in this corner here. So I actually have 3 eyepieces here in this case. Now the problem with any telescope review is I can't tell you exactly what you're going to see when you look through the eyepiece. This is highly dependent on where you live, what the light pollution is like where you are, and your particular eye-brain system. But it's even more so with a Binoviewer, and when you throw the 3D effect into it, I can't really predict what you're going to see. But I can almost guarantee you this, you're going to see something interesting. Looking at this through the Pleiades and at the Orion Nebula and at M31, the Andromeda Galaxy, it's pretty interesting. And I'll tell you, when you use a Binoviewer, at least with me, I find I view a lot longer than I do through a single eyepiece view. I tend to be a hit-and-run type of observer. The Binoviewer has a tendency to slow me down. And even more so with the 3D effect, I find I tend to just sit there and look a lot longer. Now, just as I can't tell you what you're going to see when you look through the eyepiece, we couldn't agree on which telescope we liked the best. So for me, I liked it in the Astrophysics Stowaway, this TeleVue 85, and surprisingly, that Skywatcher StarMax 102 Maxitov I showed you earlier. Our resident Binoview enthusiast John likes it in reflectors. He uses it in the 7-inch Oak Classic and in the 11-inch Starmaster Shorty. I tried this thing in lots of different telescopes around here. The only major scope I didn't use it in was the 20-inch Obsession, at least so far. I just don't feel like putting that thing together. Well, okay, at this point in the review, you probably know if you want one of these or not. Bino viewing, I would still say, is sort of a niche within our hobby. The people who like doing this are quite passionate about it. Others have yet to discover this. But if you do get a chance to look through somebody's Bino viewer, any Bino viewer, do try that out to see if this is right for you. What do I think about all this? I think I'm a little bit strange here. I go through periods. For example, for a couple of years, I really want to use a Bino viewer. It almost reaches to the point where I don't want to look through a telescope unless it has a Bino viewer in it. And that'll go on for a couple of years, and then for some reason, I'll just kind of drop out of the whole thing for a little bit while, and then I'll come back to it, a couple of years later. So I go in and out of this. But hopefully, I've given you enough information to discover if this thing is right for you. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.